Back for more, huh? Our first glyph. It's a northern forely and is found on the northern face of a lone lighthouse. Isn't that distinctive at first? But, however, in Assassin's Creed 1 in Desmond's room, all the crazy scrawlings pertaining to Japan were in one cluster or grouping. This was one of them, meaning I'm guessing this is probably some reference to Mount Fuji, and the dot represents the rising sun. I dug around online and didn't see any reference, so that's the theory I'm going with. So, let's get going here. First off, make note of the title. I am become Death, Destroyer of Worlds. And now we see a locked document tagged as Trinity. This quote and Trinity are tied to one man whose photograph and details are strewn about here in this coded puzzle. Rather than spoiling it, I will let the glyph play itself out. Also, this puzzle has an added trick to it, much like Ford's. The left two pictures once again give us our cipher to solve this. 9 is in the clouds on the photo on the left. The next photo down has a solid triangle. From here we can solve for the remaining two numbers, which are located on the blank slots, much like Ford's once again. Note the pattern with the triangles on the wheel. Think of them as individual lines that are just getting added together. The triangles follow the same pattern as the squares and circles. What do I mean? Well, let's just say that a single line is the equivalent of a circle, and that two connected or an angled line is a square. If we look at it like that, then our first spot is a circle. The second is a square, which is a given. Sum them together and you have a full triangle or a square circle. That means our 2 is a single circle. If we take a solid triangle with a 2-line shape, or 2/3 of a triangle if you want to spurge about it, that means a square plus our circle square we solved for previously. This gives us the pattern and the means to solve it. Now, time to read the letter. So, an explanation is in order. That quote, it was spoken by a fella named O, following the detonation of the first atomic bomb. This O was named J. Robert Oppenheimer, and he was the head of the Manhattan Project. The site that the bomb was detonated at was known as Trinity, which is also the title on the message we read before the bomb footage. Unfortunately, Oppenheimer admitted that he was in fact a supporter of the Communist Party. Hoover kind of led some manhunt to expose him to the public, and he also had a number of scientific enemies as well, given his strongly voiced opposition to the hydrogen bomb research on the grounds of its feasibility. It also didn't help matters that he was also, after seeing firsthand what the nuclear bombs were capable in testing, he adopted an anti-nuclear arms stance, and this definitely put a number of bullseyes on his back. And it's kind of unfortunate, but McCarthyism as a whole really took this guy and his reputation behind the woodshed. Back on topic. When the bomb exploded at Trinity, he supposedly quoted the Hindu holy book Bhagavad Gita. He said, if the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be the splendor of the Mighty One. Later on the topic, he dropped another line in an interview from the same book, I am become Death, the Destroyer of Worlds. Back to the glyph, we have one straightforward thing to wrap up here. On this display, we just drag the cursor around, and the Geiger counter starts going crazy. And when it grows loudest, on that spot we found our passcode. Glyph finished. Now, we're in Venice. This is on top of San Giacomo di Rialto. This symbol is probably strictly tied to the game and Templar plot. Piece of Eden? Check. This might be an altered version of the Eye of Providence, given the themes going on here. Still has a triangle for the Holy Trinity. The lines around the apple, symbolizing its glory, probably an allusion to the idea of the Templars using the apple to control mankind. Also, as opposed to being one eye, though, there are lots and lots of eyes within the triangle. Well, let's listen to Cam Clark talk once again.
By decree of the Council of Ten, all cittadini wishing to enlarge...
I don't know what's happening to me. I have been in the machine. You keep putting me back in, and I am losing control. It's all blurring together. I'm holding a rifle. Gettysburg is in the distance. I just stabbed a man, and there is blood on my waistcoat. I'm at the opera. Soprano. So beautiful. I'm in bed with her. She cries as I fuck her. I'm speaking at the forum. No one listens. I'm in the forest hunting. Oh, the moon. I can see the moon. I'm here. I have to stay here until you understand. Listen, why do we have these gifts, these abilities? Because it's in our blood!
And Subject 16 is starting to have his psyches all blend together at this point, so he's becoming more and more incoherent. Well, let's see what's in store for us this time. We've got a series of paintings with some sort of common theme. The seeds were planted as two worlds become one. Behold the assassins, the children of two worlds. Common thread here lies in lesser beings and gods interacting in a certain way. Hey, let's go down the list. Danae, visited by Zeus. As most folks in the know with Greek or Roman mythology will tell you, Zeus really loved making babies. If something came up involving Zeus and a female, there's a fair guess as to what he'd end up doing. This particular tryst resulted in Perseus, who is the son of, well, Danae and Zeus. He also had the Sword of Eden, you'll recall. Next is Jupiter and Io. Io was a nymph, or basically a nature spirit of sorts. She was also a priestess of Hera's. As for Jupiter, well, Jupiter is Zeus's Roman name. You guys know what happened right next, yeah? Yeah, they did naughty stuff. The situation's equivalent would be basically like Zeus horsing around with, say, the cleaning lady or an intern at his wife's place of work. Hera, as you might recall, she was quite the old battle axe, if you will, and to avoid being caught, Zeus turned Io into a cow so she could go into hiding. Hera eventually found her and just harassed her and bugged her, as you can imagine, but she eventually turned back human, but she gave birth to Epiphus, who would go on to found Memphis, Egypt, and rule as king. There was another child as well named Caroessa, who was the princess of Byzantium. Next up is Leda and the Swan. You see what's going on here, right? Well, I don't think I need to expand on that. Leda was the wife of Tyndareus, the king of Sparta. Well, that's no ordinary swan. It was Zeus in bird form. Why? Well, don't try to make too much sense of it. A hawk was basically harassing Zeus when he was in swan form, and instead of just throwing a fucking lightning bolt at it, Leda got the hawk to back off, and Zeus decided to, use his powers to seduce and reward her? It gets weirder though, so yeah, it does get weirder. So Zeus decided to goose her one night, quite literally, or actually swan her. It doesn't have the same effect. Anyhow, he did stuff with her. Thing is, the husband didn't know about this, of course, and in the same night, he decided he would do the same thing with Leda. And the end result was Leda was pregnant, and she laid eggs. Yep, she laid eggs. 2 eggs, and from these eggs, 4 children were born, apparently. Helen of Troy, Clytemnestra, Castor, and Pollux. Next is Cupid and Psyche. Hey, there's no Zeus this time. We're past that, I guess. So Cupid was the son of Aphrodite, and Psyche was a regular girl. Thing is, Psyche was quite the looker, and that made Aphrodite quite jealous. She told Cupid to shoot Psyche with one of his arrows and ensure that the first thing she sees and subsequently falls in love with is something pretty terrible, like maybe a really ugly dude or some sort of a reptile of some sort. Cupid was against this though because, well, that was pretty freaking mean to do to somebody for no reason. He argued with Aphrodite, but eventually she strong-armed him into doing it. So while Psyche was sleeping, Cupid visited her and prepared to shoot her with an arrow, apparently up close, like not from across the room, but right up against her just about. And bearing in mind that he was invisible at this time, before he could shoot her, she suddenly woke up, and in spite of the invisibility, she looked straight at him and right into his eyes, and this really creeped him out, enough to where he basically failed to shoot off an arrow, but he scraped his finger with the tip of it in the process, and it made him go from pitying her to falling in love with her. So in the end, he doesn't shoot her, and he returns to Aphrodite, and upon hearing this development, she decides to curse Psyche so no man can marry her. Cupid then says that as long as the curse lasts, he won't shoot anyone with his arrows, meaning nobody will fall in love, that was basically Aphrodite's thing. If nobody's falling in love, then there's no reason to praise Aphrodite at her shrines. Eventually, Aphrodite allows him to have Psyche, but what follows that is a pretty lengthy fairy tale or mythology, and I'm not going to get into that in the interest of saving time. Next up is the rape of Europa. Europa was a Phoenician princess descended supposedly from Io. One day she was with her father's herd of cattle and came across a white bull amid the pack. She was enamored with it, climbed atop the bull's back, and it ran away with her still on top of him. He kept on running until he hit the Mediterranean, and he began swimming, and he did not stop until he reached Crete, before revealing, hey, it's Zeus again! You know where this is going? Yeah, Zeus did his usual thing, and Europa got pregnant. Then she became the first queen of Crete as a result of this. Also, this story has a few other names, resulting from cross-translation of synonyms. Rather than rape of Europa, others sometimes call it the abduction or seduction of Europa. So, the end result of all these? Bam! Assassin symbol. What does it mean? Well, maybe the next glyphs will shed some light on this. Next, we find ourselves in Venice's main in-game bridge, Ponte Rialto on its eastern side. This symbol is an ant and is probably another Nazca drawing just like the monkey. We've already covered this general thing though, so there's not much else to say. On to the puzzles. Rings. Well, you know how this goes. Jump cut time, and hey, we're done. Quote, "The death of all tyrants will set the people free." First, we see the assassin symbol once again. What does that have to do with this? Well, the painting we see here is Ivan the Terrible grieving over the body of his son and heir, Ivan. Well, the first thought of this is, hey, Ivan the Terrible. With a name like that, he must have been a jerk. Well, his son is dead in the painting, so that must mean someone wanted to hurt his lineage. Well, here's the thing with this. Ivan was pretty religiously devout. He ruled 16th century Russia with an iron fist, to put it lightly. This resulted in him becoming the first Tsar of all Russia. However, he was incredibly super paranoid and experienced pretty infamous mood swings and fits of rage. And I'm not talking about just breaking stuff or throwing urns when angry, mind you. A number of sources go past simple short-tempered and say that he had a pretty severe case of mental illness or was just mentally damaged really badly. Now, this is very relevant. Thing is, Ivan was an intelligent and very well-groomed heir, and he was around for one of these famous outbursts and was, as a result, beaten to death by Ivan the Terrible. By the time Ivan had calmed down and saw what he'd done, he began grieving, and that's what this picture was trying to capture. The next in line as far as heirs go was the other son, who was, well, he was either as dense as a lead brick or he was outright mentally retarded. The assassin symbol is probably inferring that the assassin saw Ivan's first son as a potential threat as an heir, so they had him offed, which, I don't know how it fits in here. I mean, you wouldn't want to, I don't think that having a mentally damaged heir standing in would have been beneficial to the assassins. But next is a series of bullseyes, and as we move the cursor over them, names are revealed. Let's go through these pretty quickly. John Wilkes Booth was responsible for assassinating Abraham Lincoln. Following Lincoln's assassination, Booth and his accomplice were pursued to a tobacco farm. The farm was set on fire to coax them out, but a man named Boston Corbett shot him in the neck, severing his spine in the process. They were told to take Booth alive, but he died from the injury after a few hours. Francois Duvalier was the president of Haiti from 1957 to 1971. He was a special flavor of crazy, folks. A few years prior to becoming president, he stopped a military coup and ended up ruling by use of militias. As a result of his pretty brutal rule, nearly 30,000 Haitians were murdered by his goon squads. He was so excessive in the use of force, propaganda, and adherence to voodooism that a staggering amount of educated and skilled labor fled Haiti. As far as I can tell, he died of natural causes in 1971 at the age of 64. His son took over in his stead. Francisco Pizarro was the cousin of Hernan Cortés and, in the 16th century, led an expedition into Mexico and South America. He established the first Spanish settlement in Panama and used it as a base camp of sorts to launch expeditions southward. Natives made mention of a gold-filled territory they called Viru, which was eventually cross-translated as Peru. He found his way there and, after a long campaign, conquered Peru. The thing is, Pizarro was incredibly greedy and didn't pay his men well. Whenever he did pay them or split loot, his take was always the largest. A partner of sorts named Diego de Almagro grew irritated with this and eventually turned to violence. After a few conflicts, Pizarro captured and executed Almagro. He left his corpse on display as a sign. The thing is, he had a son named Diego de Almagro II, and he later responded to this by leading a couple dozen soldiers into Pizarro's residence and killed him, forcing the council to name him as the new governor of Peru. It didn't pan out, though, and he later fled Peru, only to die in his escape. Mary I of England, known affectionately as Bloody Mary, was Queen Elizabeth I's predecessor. To considerably cut out a lot of details, she wasn't the most pleasant ruler. She was particularly rigid in regards to religion and brought about what historians call the revival of the Heresy Act. Her brother, Edward, took up the throne and died at a young age due to tuberculosis, but he overhauled the strictest religious laws. Mary basically looked at what Edward did and said, yeah, none of that stuff happened, we're undoing all of it. Although Elizabeth did the exact same thing to Mary in turn once she came to rule. Though Mary stated that religion wouldn't be grounds for punishment, she had a habit of imprisoning and burning people at the stake for believing differently than she preferred. She died from what some folks tagged as cancer. Tomás de Torquemada, well, he was a friar in the 15th century and was the first Grand Inquisitor of Spain. To emphasize this, he was the first Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition. Quite literally, he wrote the book on being an inquisitor. Yes, he actually had an actual handbook on this that was kept within the Inquisition. In an attempt to revive or rekindle Christianity's purity, he took it on himself to get rather aggressive in asserting it. One step was, in 1492, forcibly exiling all 40,000 Jews from Spain through the use of the Alhambra decree. That was nothing, though, since kicking the Jews out of countries was all the rage from the 12th to 17th centuries in Europe. He was responsible for decrees that led to thousands of people being burned at the stake, drowned, murdered, tortured, etc. Everything terrible that you think of about the Inquisition in general is most likely due to this guy and his ideas. Even after his death, his decrees and such remained actively enforced for nearly 30 years. He lived until 1498, dying of natural causes at 78 years old. He was so hated that he needed a small army of bodyguards to tag along with him wherever he went. His tomb was ransacked and his remains were destroyed in the 19th century, though, so booyah. Next, Cleopatra. We already covered her in the tomb, so we'll skip past her. Rasputin we covered to some degree, but not through his death. He died a year before Tsar Nicholas. An attempt on his life was made in 1914, and this is important. There's a tie-in canonical sort of game on Facebook that's pretty neat and explores the backstory. I'll probably cover it during or before Brotherhood, I imagine, but it does touch on Rasputin. Now, when leaving a church, a former prostitute turned disciple stabbed Rasputin in the stomach with what should have been a fatal wound, complete with his entrails exposed. He actually survived this, though. However, medical science in them days wasn't too great. Even after being stitched up, reports from his daughter say that he was always very tired and developed an opium addiction of sorts to dull the pains he was always in. The follow-up attempts on his life did do the job, though. He was done in by a plot spearheaded by nobility and angry folks within the Duma. His death might have been exaggerated on some levels, but there were a number of claims, some proven, some not, regarding what it took to kill him. First, a group of nobility invited him down to the Yusupov family castle and down to the wine cellar they had. This is where he was given wine and a bunch of small snack cakes. The cakes were laced with cyanide, and it is said that he ate enough of them to actually kill a man several times over. But the thing is, he wasn't fazed. He didn't even show discomfort. Now, one theory is that baking of the food caused the cyanide to be rendered chemically harmless. Another, supported by his daughter, is that he couldn't have eaten cakes or wine, anything sweet like that, since his stomach wound made eating sugar impossible to do without a ton of pain or discomfort. If he was poisoned, though, he could have survived through self-administration of poisons. It's possible that he may have built up an actual immunity to poison just by giving himself smaller doses over time. He already had an attempt on his life once, so maybe he saw it as a precaution of sorts. Noticing that the cyanide wasn't working, the conspirators talked amongst themselves in secret, then returned to the cellar. Prince Felix Yusupov, the owner of the castle and one of the conspirators, pulled out a revolver and shot Rasputin in the back, causing him to fall to the ground, motionless. Satisfied with this, they packed up and decided to leave, allowing someone else to stumble over Rasputin's body or maybe delaying the cleanup, I'm not sure. Before stepping back outside, though, Yusupov realized he forgot his coat in the cellar. He went back down to get it, having left it hanging near where Rasputin was lying. As Yusupov went to grab the coat, Rasputin suddenly jumped up to his feet, grabbed Yusupov by the neck, and began to strangle him. The other conspirators, probably hearing the racket, ran down to the cellar and fired off 3 more bullets into Rasputin, sending him back onto the ground, but he was very much alive, just a little bit angry at this point. They then began beating him into submission with boards, pistols, anything hard they could find, hitting him in the head and the body, but he was still alive. Urban legends say at this point they actually removed his naughty bits and kept them as a keepsake. Weird guys, them Russians. Now, this probably just made him angrier, so they rolled him up into a rug, took him outside, and threw him into the nearby Neva River, letting him sink. Well, apparently he broke free from the carpet, but he finally did drown. Now, the autopsy notes, whether they were exaggerated or not, they were lost during the Stalin era, but other evidence has popped up over time. A photograph of his corpse shows a bullet hole in his forehead. Testimony up to that point stuck to 4 bullets in the back. However, he's said to have been found with water in his lungs, meaning that he swallowed it while drowning. Long story short, some of the testimonies are sketchy and there are holes in the information. There's one thing we can probably agree with, though. He was a very hard guy to kill. Next. Oh my. Stalin. Well, I'd rather not get into it. I'd never stop talking if we got into the Great Purge and the World War II history and all that stuff, and Animal Farm, totalitarian governments, there you go. His death, well, he had a heart attack and some other health issues following World War II, but in 1953, he had a massive stroke that paralyzed his entire right side of his body. He demanded to be left alone not long after this, but he was later discovered face down on the ground, covered in excrement, following a cerebral hemorrhage. He died not long after this. Stalin had numerous enemies, to put it lightly, so foul play was suspected. Poison comes up, particularly warfarin, which is flavorless and can cause a cascade of health failures, including stroke and hemorrhaging. Some of these guys died of natural causes, but they were hated to some degree, some more than others, and it's hinted that an assassin had a hand in it. But enough of that. We're done. Finally, number 16. We find ourselves near the thieves' hideout. This symbol here is likely a reference to the Giza necropolis. You know about the Sphinx, right? Its full name is the Great Sphinx of Giza. Also, within the necropolis, you'll find 3 pyramids of 3 different sizes, increasing in size from the southwest to the northeast. Meaning, if interpreted as map view, this is how the pyramids would appear. The pyramids I'm talking about in particular, from smallest to largest, are the Menkaure, the Khafre, and the Khufu. You might wonder what the importance of this is. Well, the pyramids typically housed pharaohs and such, and these are not too different. The issue, though, is that these 3 are situated just as we'd see them on the map, meaning that they are perfectly in line. The main theory to explain the positioning and precision is that they were built in line with the constellation, particularly Orion. The thought is that the pyramids were built so that they could be oriented and placed within reference to the 3 center position stars on the constellation. This theory claims that this was done as some sort of a tie-in or symbolism directed towards Osiris, the sun god. But this is another theory, and in itself, it isn't thoroughly accepted and has some holes. But regardless, no sense dwelling on it. On to the puzzly bits.
It happened in 1908. Or was it 2008? 1708? I can't remember!
So, a letter to Tesla. It isn't by the Templars, clearly. The Templars took the staff from the Tsar, or Nicholas II in this case, so that means Rasputin, who was mentioned in the past, wasn't acting independently. But next, we see a map. None of these are right. If we drag our cursor over them, they change. However, one of these is within Russia and was mentioned in the letter. Remember Tunguska? Well... blammo, Tesla magic. The dates are a bit funny though. So 1905 was when Rasputin was tapped as the healer for Tsarevich Alexei, Nicholas II's ill child and heir. The Tunguska event was in 1908. Wardenclyffe itself fell through, I suppose, in 1907 or so. It kind of tapered off into foreclosure in 1908. So this means that the apple was stolen and his mind messed up around that time. But he still built Telefunken without its use, though, it seems. Huh. Oh well. But yeah, that wraps up our 4th segment. One more to go, guys. I'll play the footage so far 3 times per usual. I'll see y'all next time.